evening and welcome back to the Talkin' Phillies Sports program with your boy Matty B here on the edge of Phillies Sports. It is Tuesday, March 7th, 2023. It's 9 p.m. It's Tuesday, and you're watching EOP, so that must mean one thing and one thing only. That means you're with me, and it's a pleasure, as always, to be back with you week after week to blend or to spew my version of Philly sports. And boy, oh boy, once again, the Philadelphia sports scene just does not disappoint, because even in the I guess seemingly quietest times, it has something to offer. And we've had another full week of it here in the Delaware Valley this past week. Tonight, it's going to be a little bit of a different format than we usually do here on the program. There will be no your night or your day in Philly sports history this week. I just couldn't find anything sexy enough to talk about. There's really not much going on in the history of the Philadelphia sports scene on March 7th. And there's a couple of things on March 8th and March 9th. But, I figured the hell with it. I'm going to bypass it for the week because there's a lot to talk about. But I'm also going to limit the show tonight to 2 for 4. That's right. I'm only going 2 for 4 tonight. I'm batting, 500, right? I don't want to necessarily belabor the point with the other two sports teams, i.e. the Eagles and Sixers. Nothing really much to talk about there. As you already know where I stand on the Sixers, I will not speak of them until Glenn Rivers is fired. And then, of course, the Eagles are in the midst of a reallocation, retransfer of all kinds of stuff. There's some things to talk about there, but I'm going to bypass it for the night because the two teams that I am going to talk about have offered a bunch of stuff to talk about. And that's, of course, your hockey team, the Philadelphia Flyers. And yes, folks, we still do have a hockey team in Philadelphia. I know you think we don't. And judging by the reactions and some of the non-moves that the team has made over the last, week, you'd be rightfully justified in thinking we don't have a hockey team here in Philadelphia. But we do. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about them, as well as your baseball team, the Philadelphia Phillies, who are in peak spring training form right now as the Grapefruit League continues to churn along down there in South Florida. And we're going to throw in some WBC action. The World Baseball Classic kicks off here in about 3 hours. 3 hours. Can you believe it? We're going to have meaningful international baseball, the tournament of tournaments, top of the heap of international baseball tournaments will start in 3 hours. And of course, Team USA is in that. And the Phillies are very well represented around the world on WBC rosters. And we'll get a little bit into that as well. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to go 2 for 4 and some WBC. So I guess 2.5 for 4 is what we're going to do here on the program, because I felt it was appropriate based on what has been happening, especially with the hockey team over the last week or so. And let's get into the hockey team, shall we? And I know, man, listen, it's going to be a couple things tonight for me. One, I am going to do something I very rarely do, and that's I'm going to defend the GM. I'm going to defend him. I am going to defend Chuck Fletcher a little bit. I'm not going to completely throw him under the bus, then back over him, and then pull in front of him again. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to defend him a little bit because I think he's being kind of martyred a little bit for what's happened with this team. And please, before you shut me down and kick me off the internet, let me explain myself. I am not relieving him of his accountability and responsibility for this current state of the Flyers, but I really have problems with, and I have a lot of heartburn actually, with thinking that Chuck Fletcher created this mess. He hasn't. Has he fixed it? No. But has he created it? He has not created it. And I know the venom right now and the booze are flowing in Chuck Fletcher's direction. Rightfully so, folks. Rightfully so. But there's more to it as far as I'm concerned, and we're going to get into some of that here in a second, of where I feel that this team kind of is right now. Now, optically speaking, and I mean optically, like around for a person who doesn't follow hockey, a person that doesn't follow the NHL, optically speaking, the Flyers are a dumpster fire. Everything from what's happening on the ice to what's happening off the ice to what's not happening on the ice and to what's not happening off the ice. They just can't seem to get out of their own way. And The business side of things, the Ed Schneider comments about he's doing gymnastic moves in his grave. He's not rolling around anymore. He's doing like somersaults and like pirouettes and all that stuff in his grave. I kind of agree with that, but I'm not prepared to get Ed Schneider a pass either. Yeah, I know he's dead, and God rest his God rest his soul and all, but Ed Schneider is part of the problem too. He is. I'm sorry to say it. He is. Um, and it goes deeper than Chuck Fletcher. It goes deeper than Ed Schneider, and the current inhabitants of the Flyers and Spectacor and Comcast and all that are absolutely doing nothing to fix it, and that's what the issue is. It's the non movement, the non vertical movement of this team, the status quo, whatever you want to call it. That's my issue, and we're gonna unpack all that here right now. And I think the first thing to unpack is to blow out of the water this notion that Chuck Fletcher, Dave Scott, Comcast, Spectacor, that they wake up every morning purposely looking to sabotage this organization. That is ridiculous. That is ludicrous. That is utterly negligent to say that. There is nobody, and I believe this wholeheartedly, that there is nobody that's employed by the Philadelphia Flyers currently, from the I guess Dave Scott all the way on down to the guy that fills up the water bottles, that is purposely looking to sabotage this team. And to say that's what's happening is just negligent, and you don't know what you're talking about, because that's not what's happening. I think they care. I know they care. I know they care a lot. Uh, but what they're doing obviously is not translating well. And it seems like everything they do just blows up in their face. And I don't know if that's luck, a curse, whatever. I don't know, but it just seems that way. But to think that they are negligently and criminally looking to put this team in the grave, it just it doesn't fly with me, because I don't think that's the case at all. So let's get off that, and let's get that out of the way first, because obviously that needs to be identified. Oh, Big Mike checking in. What's up? What's up, Mike? How are you? Be sure to be checking out Mike here in about an hour and a half on Clear the Ice, because we do have some hockey tonight. But let's get back to the meat here, right? So we got Chuck Fletcher. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. All right. So it's been a hell of a what was it? 11, 12 days has been really just kind of like bad. Just like, I guess bad is really what it equates to. Uh, so just a quick recap of the last 12 days in Flyers hockey. They lose combined 12-2 to the Montreal Canadiens and the New Jersey Devils in back-to-back nights. What was it? 5-2 and 7-0. Then they decide, the best thing now is to have a home game against the New York Rangers, where, of course, an embarrassment happens where the Ranger fans take over the Wells Fargo Center, and a sea of blue and all that. And, I knew it was bad because when you're watching the game, now, by the way, you also had to really search for the game, because TNT blacked out the game in Philadelphia, and just embarrassment. It's getting blacked out in the home market on national television. It's embarrassing. It's optically very embarrassing. Um, so once you did find it, because I think I found it on YouTube, right? I'm watching this game. And one of the first things that I realized things were bad that night was that when Tony DeLangelo touched the puck, a sea of boos. And I'm like, why are they booing him? What did he do? And then I'm thinking, wait a second. Ranger fans do that. So to audibly hear the boos coming at Tony DeLangelo on a road game for the Rangers, I knew something was afoot at that point. And then, of course, they would pan out to the crowd, and it was just blue everywhere. And yes, optically embarrassing. But it's not like the Flyers. It's not like the Flyers are the pioneers here. Do we not remember this past summer at the bank? Do we not? Because I was actually at one of these games this summer, the Mets series in August, where they had a Met fan throw out the first pitch, where if you're sitting in the stands, you're sitting in waves of Mets fans. So let's not first kind of like condemn the Flyers to hell because they broke some sacred ground here. No, they didn't. All right. The Phillies were victims of this in the Phillies excuse. Okay. I think it's not necessarily the fans. Well, I do. I just think we're a different type of fan today. we're different. It's not like it was when I was young. It's not like it was when I was in my 20s. And it's sad because this is a town in Philadelphia that, puts that fandom thing on our chest like a badge. And I just think it's changing, and it's changing more so for that younger generation that just doesn't really care, or that doesn't want to sit for the 3-hour marathon. They'd rather just watch the highlights or whatever. So I'm not giving the Flyers a pass, because whenever you let a rival, especially a New York team, now I guess we can start really panicking if Cowboy fans ever take over the link, then I guess it's a whole other level of panic. But when you let a rival's fan base come into your own building and take it over, it is a bad optic. But it's not the first time it's happened, unfortunately, here in Philadelphia, and it's not the first time it's happened in the last 6 months. As I mentioned, the series in August against the Mets in Philadelphia, a Met fan threw out the first pitch on the first game of a doubleheader on the Saturday game. I was at the second game of the doubleheader, and it was nothing but Met fans in the building where I was. They were all over that place all weekend long. So let's give it to where it needs to be. It's our fandom that's at stake here. What are we doing as a fan base? We're going to sit here and complain left and right. Well, what was the excuse for the Phillies? Phillies went to the World Series. So I'm prepared not to give the Flyers a pass, but it is what it is. But optically, it is not good. So then after that, then the trade deadline comes around. Then this was the thing that we talked about. I talked about on this show. I talked about it on the Clear the Ice program. I talked about it whenever I could definitely talk about it, how the Flyers are going to be are just our vindication. Our VF day is coming when we can unload some of these high price contracts and move on from the JVRs and move on from the Ivan Provorovs and move on from the Kevin Hayeses of the world. And the bottom line was, I resigned myself. I got it through my own brain that we're not moving off of Ivan Provorov. We're not moving off of Kevin Hayes. We're not moving off of potentially Joel Farabee. We're not moving off of Carter Hart, Tony DeLangelo, players like that. We're not going to move off of those guys at any kind of trade deadline deal, because it's just not a buyer's or seller's market. It's a buyer's market trade deadline. No team is going to give you max value for players that have any value. No, they're going to give you prospects. They're going to give you draft picks. And yeah, you could say here that we are definitely in the need of prospects and draft picks, that we are. But to sell off pieces for just prospects and draft picks and we all have seen what that's done for us. It's not a guarantee. We always talk about that. Draft pick is just that. It's a pick. It's a roll of the dice. So when you're involved in a seller's market, or I should say a buyer's market, why would you even flirt unless there was something that just blew you away about moving off of those pieces? Now, I'm not sitting here telling you that these are the pieces the team needs to go forward with. They definitely need to move them. But Chuck Fletcher said it during his press conference. He just didn't like any of the trades. He didn't like any of the trades for those types of players. He didn't mention names, but he mentioned that he fielded many calls on other players. And he only mentioned one player by name, of course, that was JVR, but he had fielded calls on other players. And I knew, and I'm glad he did, because I think he did the right thing. I'm sure what teams were looking for Kevin Hayes was not optimal or maximum in the value that Kevin Hayes could bring. Now, I am looking for salary cap relief, and a lot of you might be sitting here saying, you know what? Salary cap relief is a start, and it is. But you're trading away known assets, known proven NHL assets, regardless of how they might have fallen on bad times here in Philadelphia. Kevin Hayes is not what this team needs. Kevin Hayes needs to be moved. I mean, he's just not, he doesn't fit here. In 5 years from now, Kevin Hayes is going to be on the wrong side of 40. And what's he going to do for us then? Nothing. So, yes, Kevin Hayes does need to be moved. Ivan Provorov just never kind of panned out as the high draft pick defenseman, new Eric Desjardins, Chemo Timonen hybrid, rolling the one, and it never did work out for him. He was not that type of player, but he is a quality D2 in this league, and teams could use him. Joel Farabee. Now you could be on two different sides of the Joel Farabee coin. This is a down year. He battled back from an injury. Maybe he wasn't 100%. Maybe he hasn't not been 100%. Maybe he's had a problem with Torts' system. I don't know. But obviously, if Joel Farabee is part of the future here, then that'll be determined over the summer. But that's a move that needs to be sit down and studied, and they need to come to kind of a Jesus moment with that and figure out if Joel Farabee, maybe it's Joel Farabee, this isn't like Tortorella, and he'll never be able to blossom under him. That's fine. But there's a time and a place to kind of work all that out. And at the trade deadline is not. So potentially, I could see maybe Joel Farabee being moved this summer if that's what both sides or both parties agree to. So trades like that, folks, were never going to happen. They just weren't. The Flyers were not in a position to make those types of moves. They were in a position to be fleeced. And what is the one thing we've been kind of on Fletcher about? Stop being fleeced. Stop with the bad trades. Well, I kind of like this side. I kind of like Aaron on the side of caution with these players because it was the right thing to do overall. Now, what happens this summer and what is the future? Another story, right? They got to go. And somewhere, somehow, some form, they got to be moved over the summer. And maybe it's for just a little bit better than what he could have got in the trade deadline. We'll never know because we're not in that room. Yeah, I wish I was, but we're not in that room. So to sit here and kind of play Monday morning quarterback with why they didn't trade Ivan Provorov or why they didn't trade Kevin Hayes, again, it's just it's exercise in insanity because it's you don't know all the variables, you don't know all the numerators, the denominators, you don't know any of that. You just know that the trade, Chuck Fletcher said, was just not good for the Flyers. Now let's move on to the player that was in everybody's crosshairs. As a matter of fact, the guy's been in everybody's crosshairs since he was brought here 5 years ago, and that was James Van Riemsdyk, right? God, and listen, I was part of that. How could we go through this trade deadline and not move JVR? How is that possible? It's a solid third liner on a good team, 300 goal scorer in his career, takes up a lot of room in front of that net, cleans up a lot of rebounds. I mean, he is the type of player you want for a playoff push. Definitely, if you're a Stanley Cup contender, if you think you're looking for, he is definitely that guy. He's the guy that can be down there, on the goal mouth, doing what JVR does. So why the hell couldn't we move JVR? I'm going to give you 7 million reasons why they couldn't move friggin' JVR. And it was that damn contract. It has always been that damn contract. It was one of the worst contracts ever given to any Flyer. And I'm talking Brzagolov land, Chris Pronger land. I mean, it was bad. 7 million annual for a guy on the wrong side of 30 who never really panned out to be the type of player that he was drafted to be. But yet a serviceable NHLer, but not $7 million worth of service NHLer. That, folks, that is why JVR is still a Flyer. Nobody was willing to take that 7 million. Nobody was taking 3.5 million, as Chuck Fletcher said. He was accommodating. I'll pay half. 3.5 was not even in that range for a player like JVR. It was the contract. That is why JVR did not get moved. Now, sit here all you want. I've heard this up and down the pike, right? I've heard, well, I would have taken JVR for a bag of pucks. Well, guess what? A team wasn't willing to sell a $3.5 million bag of pucks. That's the bottom line. Nobody wanted the deal. Nobody wanted that contract. Nobody wanted to take on that disaster of a contract. Now, is Chuck Fletcher at fault for that contract? No. No, he's not. Chuck Fletcher had absolutely nothing to do with that contract. Chuck Fletcher inherited that deal. Chuck Fletcher was as stuck, just like anybody else would have been, with JVR at that time. And we talked about it in the past. What was it, 2 years ago? Oh, the expansion draft. Ron Francis and the Kraken. They're going to take JVR. Why would they? An expansion team standing up for the first time. At that time, I think JVR still had 2 years left on the deal. They're not going to pay a $7 million annual contract for the next 2 years for JVR. Nobody was taking that. And that's the reality, guys. And I know it hurts to hear that for some people that, oh, he could have maneuvered something. No, he couldn't. He couldn't. It was a dumb contract that nobody else wanted to inherit. And now the realization is that contract will haunt the Flyers to the end, and JVR will walk away with no compensation. Now we'll get the $7 million back annual. Yeah. But there was no way. There was no way Anybody was taking that deal, even 3.5. So now the Venom. Now the Zach McEwen and the Pat Brown for a 5th and a 6th round draft pick. One was in 2024 and the other one was in 2025. Did Chuck Fletcher fail at the trade deadline? You're damn right. You damn right he failed. He failed miserably. But you know what? In Chuck Fletcher's mind, he didn't fail. Because you know why he didn't fail, folks? Because in Chuck Fletcher's mind, he knows what he's doing. The problem is, he hasn't told us that. He has done the opposite. He has lied. He has lied outright to us. And every chance he's gotten, he has lied. And in that press conference, I don't know if you guys had a chance to check this out. And if you have not, I highly recommend you go back and you look at the day or the trade deadline press conference last Friday. It's about 2:45 in the afternoon. Chuck Fletcher spoke formally for the first time since the beginning of the season, not counting all those little pressers that he does when they stick the cell phone in his face and he's laughing with all the damn stiff ass beat reporters that cover the Flyers. But I'm talking about a press conference. He was pushed by Charlie O'Connor to make the right to say the right thing because Charlie pressed him. Said, "Listen, Chuck, how can you tell the fans? He didn't say the fans, but how can you tell the people out there that you are the guy that can make these moves? Because we've heard this before." And then Chuck made a very standard conversation or standard answer. Then he went on to the next question, but then he doubled back to that question because I know it bothered, right? Because nobody wants to be told they suck at what they do. They don't. That's just human nature, right? And Chuck Fletcher doubled back and began to give an explanation that we've never heard before. Out of all these years, he never gave this explanation before. He always gave us something else. But then he said last season they were trying to maximize the final year of Claude Giroux's contract. That was the reason for the trades. That was the reason for bringing Risto, Cam Atkinson in here, was because they were trying to maximize the last year of Claude Giroux's trade. Well, that is not what we were kind of told. And then this past season, they were tepid in going after Johnny Hockey because they were concerned about the injuries of Sean Couturier and Joel Farabee and Cam Atkinson. So, but that's news to us. This is what, March. And we're talking back in the summer. He didn't tell us that. He just told us that we like what we got. We're going to go a different route. And this is that, right? He didn't tell us anything about being tepid. I would have remembered the word tepid. He never mentioned that. But he was finally honest. He was finally honest without saying it. He was honest about the fact that this team is in a rebuild. And that is liberating. It's liberating to me. Because now at least we all seem to be on the same page. Now we can kind of turn that page, right? Look past everything. Look past this nonsense of a retool and get to the business of a rebuild. And that's what I fully expect the Flyers to do. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take because this year was that audition year. This was the year that the Flyers found out for once and for all what players were going to be involved in the future and what players weren't. So now the spotlight's on him. Like I said, I think I said on this program last week, the GM is his job in the spotlight is not that permanent, right? He has his time. But during the actual season, it's about the coach, the players, the game. It's all about that. But during from the trade deadline, pretty much up until the start of training camp, it's about the GM. It's about the trades. It's about the draft. It's about all those things that you go into constructing a team. And now Chuck Fletcher's back in the spotlight. He had that 3-month little break, but now he's back. And what he does going forward is going to be very interesting to see because he said, out of his own mouth that, yeah, he knows the fans are disappointed. Well, Chuck goes a little bit past that because on the day after that, on that Saturday, the Flyers held a town hall meeting where they invited all the season ticket holders to attend. And then they promptly booed Chuck Fletcher when they came out. And Steve Dinosaur Coates, who I didn't even think was alive anymore, went up on stage and said, "You got to be classy and let's not act like that." You know what, Steve? Screw you, man. Take your Canadian ass back up north, dude. I don't want to. You don't be telling me or the fans how they should or should not react to a GM that has lied, to a GM that has let us all down. Don't posture with the classy thing. Get the hell out of here, man. I don't want to hear that. So it's been a very, very tumultuous week here in Flyers land. But with all that being said, I'm going to go back to what I started out with by saying that I hold not only Chuck Fletcher responsible, I hold Ed Schneider responsible. I do. I do hold him responsible for this. I hold him responsible. I hold Bobby Clark responsible. Bill Barber, who's still somehow employed by the Flyers. Paul Holmgren is responsible. I hold them all. Ron Hextall, Ron Hextall responsible. I hold them all responsible because it's not like we've come off this amazing 25-year Stanley Cup run to fall back into this stage of mediocrity. No, no. This team in its illustrious 67-year history. I don't know, is it what? Yeah, 57, 67, whatever, whatever the the math is from 1967 to now. I think it's like 67 years or something. I don't know. In this team's history, they have won 2 Stanley Cups, and they won them back-to-back years. And that was the legacy, man. That was the cementing of a legacy of the greatness of the orange and friggin' black. Back-to-back Stanley Cups. But to put those in a little bit more perspective, the first cup in 73 and 74 was won 1 month after I was born. Oh, no, I'm sorry. 1 month after I turned 1. Yeah, after I turned 1. And then the following year when I turned 2. Okay? I'll be 50 in April. Okay? So, let's put that in some perspective. Is Chuck Fletcher involved in that? Did Chuck Fletcher have a hand in that? And yeah, I got it. I got Stanley Cup runs of the mid 80s or the mid late 80s, and I got the run in the late 90s, and I got the fall ass backwards into the 2010 one. I got that. But you know what? For the most part, where have the Stanley Cups been? They've been gone. They've not been there. They've competed and they've been in it. They've always a perennial playoff team, but they haven't won the prize. And folks, for those of you who don't know Stanley Cup lore or Stanley Cup mythology, you guys know what Stanley Cup is, right? It's that big, huge cup that's awarded every year to the NHL champion. Well, they got to put a cap on the cup, right? Because if they put every team's panel or every team's name on the cup, the thing would be about 1,000 foot long or a foot tall, and no one could carry it. So what they do is that every 50 years, a team comes off the cup, and that would be you go on the cup 1 year, you got 50 years on the cup, and then your panel comes off. That 73, 74 Stanley Cup champion, folks, next year comes off. Following year, with the 74, 75 team, comes off. So in 2 years' time, in 3 Stanley Cup champion time, there will be no more Flyer representation on the Stanley Cup. None. Unless the Flyers do something dramatic, and I mean like earth-shattering dramatic, and get back to the Cup in the next 3 years, we will no longer be represented on the Stanley Cup. Is that Chuck Fletcher's fault? 50 years of ineptitude. Is that his fault? No. Does he have a hand in it? Yeah. But all this venom about how he's ruining the team and purposely driving the team into the ground, I'm not buying. And yes, so for those of you who know me out there, you're probably wondering, what the hell are you talking about, you hypocrite? I mean, you want to tar and feather Howie Roseman on a daily basis. Yeah, I do. That's why I don't understand why I'm defending Chuck Fletcher, but I am. Maybe I have a kinship more to hockey than I do football. I don't know. But I still believe Howie Roseman's driving the team into the ground. But I'm here partly defending Chuck Fletcher. I'm not prepared to give him a complete pass, but I'm going to partly defend him. Now I want to go back to the recent past because yes, he does have a hand in this. And yes, he does have a hand of accountability. And I want to go back to when he arrived. I want to go over his timeline with you folks because I want to know and I want to understand more about what has happened here and how we got here and how we got to this position. And I want to start with an October night in the year 2015. I don't know I think it might have been right around this time of the start of the 2015-2016 NHL season, right? The Flyers were playing a game. I was living in Virginia at the time. I was down there in the Richmond area, living in Virginia. And I don't remember who carried the national games at the time, but I remember Mike Milbury, the old Boston Bruin head coach. Well, he was one of the broadcasters before he got fired for making inappropriate remarks and stuff. But anyway, he was doing the post game that night, and I think it was with it might have been with Keith Jones. What he was doing the post game with, but they were talking about the Flyers, and then the Flyers were just a god awful team. They had lost, and Bill Murray made a statement that, you know what, with the draft picks that are currently in the AHL, and then down there a little lower in the ECHL, and then a little bit lower than that in junior hockey, the Flyers' future is looking bright because the Flyers had done something correctly. They had amassed massive amounts of draft capital in the early part of the 2010s to kind of dip where they were, but now they're in a position here in the next 2 or 3, 4 years, once these draft picks kind of mature and hit the NHL, where they're going to pull themselves up and they're going to be a sight. They're going to be a team to be reckoned with. Problem was, folks, we all know how this story ended. The drafting during that time was horrible. The German Rustevs, the the Ivan Provorovs, the Nolan Patricks, the Phil Myers, the Robert Haggs. I'm going to go on and on and on, but they're all misses. Every last single one of them was a miss. And it kind of reminds you of the Sixers during the process when they amassed all those turned out to be number 1 overall picks, and only one hit out of the lot. Joel Embiid kind of brings back memories of that. Well, unfortunately, in hockey, in basketball, you can get away with just one first overall pick hit. Hockey, you can't. You need more than one. And the Flyers didn't get any of them. Not a one. Not a one out of all that draft capital during that time, like 2011 through 2014. Not one of them hit. You can't survive that. You can't. And then when Ron Hextall came here and he drafted horribly, it was the death roll for this team. So it's not hard to pinpoint where this thing began to go off the rails completely. It's a little harder to pinpoint when it started to go off the rails, because it might have started going off the rails in the 80s. But it's harder to pinpoint then. It's very easy to pinpoint now. They just haven't drafted well or good at all. And that's why we're in the situation we're in right now. Our draft picks haven't worked out. The wrong players were picked. We've made some questionable moves. And here we are. So I wanted to go back deeper. And I wanted to kind of put it on paper. So I wrote it down. I wrote Chuck Fletcher's timeline down, right? I wanted to see exactly how it all came to be. And I wanted to relive some of the feelings and get back kind of what Chuck Fletcher used to be here, right? Because I remember when he first got here, he was a breath of fresh air, right? He was replacing Ron Hextall, who single-handedly drove this team into the ground. Remember that? And you remember one of the first things Chuck Fletcher did when he arrived? What was that? That was in December of 2018. What was one of the first things Chuck Fletcher did? He fired Dave Hextall. What a stiff. Now, of course, Dave Hextall, the head coach up in Seattle, is about to take that team to the playoffs in their second year of existence. But Dave Hextall wasn't the right fit for this team. He was the wrong fit for the team that he was coaching at that time, right? They fired Dave Hextall, right? He put Scott Gordon in as an interim head coach. Scott Gordon was the coach of the Phantoms, right? And then what is one of the first player moves that Chuck Fletcher does? Do you guys remember? I do. He promoted Carter Hart. Remember that? Remember Carter Hart at that time or that season was in camp with the Flyers, and fans were begging Ron Hextall and the Flyers to and Hextall to give Hart a shot. Bring him up now. What are we waiting for? He's sitting around in the minors. He needs to be up there with the big team because we're having massive goaltending issues. What was the year before that, or that year they went through 8 goalies? Remember that? That was one of the first player moves that Chuck Fletcher made. He promoted Carter Hart. Carter Hart came in and had a really great run his first couple months in the league. Kind of stabilized the Flyers, if you remember. Flyers were having a horrible season. But he came in and he kind of stabilized things. And the Flyers, for a while, I think heading into February, were right on the outside of the playoff race. Now they fell apart down the stretch, but they were like brought back to life by Carter Hart and Scott Gordon. Remember that? We weren't really that upset about Chuck Fletcher then, were we? So that leads us, of course, to the summer of 2019, and then we bring in AV, and AV, be a effing flyer, all that, and he's an old school guy. He's hard as nails. He's the kind of guy we needed. Coming from a gimmicky college coach and Dave Hacksaw. Let's get let's get in there. Let's get him in there, kind of, break down the doors of the entitlement, break down the doors of what this team feels that they're entitled to on the ice. So AV comes in, they go off the Czech Republic and play in that international kickoff tournament thing, or whatever they called it, the start of the season. And the 2019-20 Flyers were actually a very good hockey team for the first 4 months of the year. They were one of the hottest teams in hockey when the COVID pandemic started and the shutdown happened. Now, can you equate what maybe the Flyers are today because of COVID? I don't think so. But the Flyers were coming off. They literally, the last game the Flyers played heading into the lockout, or the shutdown, sorry, was a home game against, I believe it was Boston or Tampa. No, it was Boston, and they lost 1-0, and it broke a 10-game winning streak. And then they had that big long layoff. They came back in the bubble, and then they went into that prelim, or that play in, not the play-in round, but the seeding round, where they ended up winning number 1 overall in the Eastern Conference, which I always thought was kind of a fallacy, because the way I looked at these teams that the Flyers were playing, it seemed like the Flyers were playing like that was Game 7 of the Stanley Cup, and the teams they were playing against were playing it like it's an abbreviated spring training or a preseason. They were just trying to knock the rust off. But the Flyers were out there fighting for every inch of ice in this thing. So I always thought that number 1 overall seed in the East, coming out of the bubble thing, I didn't buy that. And then they went into the playoffs. They beat Montreal, but they really kind of just outlasted Montreal. Montreal was just a younger, didn't have that much talent. They kind of outlasted Montreal, but Montreal pushed the Flyers. And then they ran into the buzzsaw of the Islanders. Islanders just had too much talent. Just eventually overtook the Flyers and pushed them out, right? But we were excited and we were happy, because we seemingly have had now we have the right combination of coach, Carter Hart, he had that breakout season. Things were looking great. But then Matt Niskanen, remember Matt Niskanen? Remember that name, folks? Matt Niskanen up and retires out of nowhere, and it relieves this huge question mark on the defense, right? How can Ivan Provorov survive? What are we going to do for Ivan Provorov? What's next for him? And then I remember thinking to myself, what are you talking about? Ivan Provorov's been in the league now 7-8 years. Isn't he the guy that other players should want to play with? Why does he still need another guy to play with? I thought he was that generational defenseman. I thought he was that next coming of, I mentioned, a hybrid of Eric Desjardins and Kimmo Timonen. I thought that's what he was. Why in the hell is the retirement of Matt Niskanen affecting Ivan Provorov? Well, who cares? Ivan should be like, I don't care who it is. Give me somebody else. But it wasn't that way. Because in a lot of ways, Matt Niskanen made up for a lot of errors that Ivan Provorov was committing on the ice. Because Ivan Provorov was exposed for being not as good as he was, advertised. So then we head into that shortened 2021 season, where you had the COVID thing. Owners were concerned about moving money. They didn't know about, can't trade this guy. I don't know how much money I'm going to lose. The season's going to be delayed. It's going to start in January. It's going to be a weird 56-game marathon. We're not really going to be doing, so there wasn't really much of a trade market at that time. And the Flyers coming out of the bubble were seemingly a different type of team, right? We all thought that they were one thing, and they ended up not being that team. So I don't necessarily fault the Flyers or Chuck Fletcher for not identifying that at that time. It was all about COVID then. You guys remember, this was only a couple years ago, right? They had a disastrous 2020-21 season. Disastrous, and then we heard the excuses of no camp, no full preseason, no, too many back-to-back games. We heard all that heading into, the summer of 2021. And then Chuck Fletcher goes but wild. And he pulls off massive amounts of trades. It's the Phil Myers, Nolan Patrick to Nashville for Ryan Ellis. It's Ghost heading out to Arizona for with draft picks or whatever it was. It's Risto to Buffalo. It's Robert Haig. I think he was part of that trade with Risto. It's Cam Atkinson and Voracek. I mean, he was all in trying to reshape this team. And I didn't hear anybody complaining in July of 2021 about what Chuck Fletcher was doing. I certainly wasn't. I was all in on those trades. Now, obviously, things have happened since then that we know may not be, maybe it wasn't the best trades, right? Obviously, the first thing is the Ryan Ellis deal. You know, 4 games into his, or 2 games into his Flyer, 3 games into his Flyer career, whatever it was, he gets hurt in a career ending injury that we still don't know exactly what it is. Now, does that happen? I mean, you would think that an injury like that, you would remember it. It's the end of his career. You think they would at least carted him off the ice or had to bring a stretcher in? No, he went off on his own, and then that was it. So, was there some lies there? Was Nashville not up front? Was he already damaged goods coming from Nashville? Did the Flyers know that, and they took their chances on him? I don't know, and we'll never know that. Oh, maybe we will when Ryan Ellis retires and we can ask him. Obviously, that was the first, major issue. And then the core injury to Kevin Hayes and then the back injury to Sean Couturier derailed the season before it even got going. And then the Flyers decide, to part from AV. And then we bring in Mike Yeo as the interim coach. And then this is what happens that cemented Chuck Fletcher's fate. The ill advised, I have a blank check. This is going to be a quick turnaround, 2 or 3 year process statement by Dave Scott. You guys remember this? Chuck Fletcher never said that. Dave Scott did. It was in that January press conference, right? I think right after they fired AV and they were kind of given a little bit of a state of the union. And Dave Scott said, this is not acceptable. I'm paraphrasing, of course. I don't remember his exact quote. This is not acceptable. We're going to get this fixed. I have a blank check here. This is going to be something very quick. It's a retool. It's not a rebuild. We're going to come back. I wasn't there in the building and I wasn't inside Chuck Fletcher's mind at the time, but I guarantee you he was losing his mind when he said that because there's no such thing as a blank check at any level of professional sports anymore. Salary cap limitations are just not, it's not feasible. And I think Chuck Fletcher knew that it wasn't going to be a quick retool. But either he was protecting his owner, being loyal. I don't know. But he went along with it. Okay, he went along with it. And then this summer, with the Johnny Hockey stuff, and now I'm gonna put to bed. I thought we were done talking about Johnny fucking Hockey, but I guess we're gonna bring it up again. Um, Listen, would I've liked Johnny Hockey here? Yeah, absolutely. He's a hometown kid. He would have done well here. He would have put people in the seats, but he would not have done anything to get us to a Stanley Cup. He would have been another bad contract. He would have been another player that was past his prime when we finally turned this corner. And he'd be the JVR 3 years from now that we're trying to unload because we just can't afford him anymore. And we need to get younger. We need more bodies to replace him. It just wouldn't have worked for us. It wasn't the right deal. And I know it upsets a lot of people because Johnny Hockey's a home run hitter. Listen, Johnny Hockey had a great season last year. But if you look back at Johnny Hockey's numbers, last season was it. That was his best season as a pro ever. He never ever has ever matched or come close to what his output was last year. Now this year he's struggling with Columbus because, well, I mean, Columbus is in a worse position than the Flyers are. But Johnny Hockey was not the right fit here. As hard as that sounds, and it was hard for me to hear it too, or to understand it or to acknowledge it. He was not the right fit. So it was a smart move by Chuck Fletcher not to go after him. It was also a smart move to unload Claude Giroux for some draft picks that we're going to start yielding next season, or actually this season and next season. You got 2 first-round picks next year, right? So we get to this season, And then we flash forward back to the trade deadline conversation, right? The conversation of tepid. We were tepid about the health of Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson and Joel Farabee, right? We were tepid. So it makes it sound like, at least to me, maybe they were looking at Johnny Hockey. I always thought they were. I don't believe, again, this is the lies. I don't believe for a minute that they didn't kick the tires on Johnny Hockey. I don't believe for a minute they didn't call his agent. I didn't. I don't. But I think once they kind of assessed everything and was looking at the fact that Johnny Hockey would be out there on the ice anchoring a line next to Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost, it just didn't seem feasible to go that route. If you think about it, it makes sense. Again, it's the realization that people don't want to hear, but it makes sense. Folks, Chuck Fletcher has made a mess of things, but it's not been because he hasn't tried. All right. Ryan Ellis injury, yeah, that might be the one that really, really hurts us long term. Okay, but the injury to Sean Couturier, the injuries to Cam Atkinson, I mean, these are injuries. What's Cam Atkinson suffered an injury that only 3 players in the history of the National Hockey League have ever had before. All right, it is what it is. It's bad luck. But now we got John Tortorella, who, if you don't see the product or you don't see the change, at least in the culture of this team, then you don't know what you're talking about either. Because the Flyers are not the same team they were last year, but yet they are the same team. Talent wise, they're worse, but yet they play better because of the cultural shift of John Tortorella. We found the right coach. Now it's a matter of finally getting him some pieces, and that's going to take time. Tortorella said it himself. It's not going to be a fun season next year either. It's not. It's going to take more than 1 year. It's going to take more than 2 or 3 years for a quick retool. It's not a retool. It is a rebuild. And I think that what it comes down to for me, and when I assess the Chuck Fletcher thing, and when I look back on it, and when I look back at where he has demonized himself, it's because he's lied. It's because he's lied. It's because his trades haven't worked out. And it's because he inherited a really bad farm system from Ron Hextall, which he had nothing to do with. Now, Chuck Fletcher's been drafting over the last few years. There's some players of his drafts that are getting ready to come in. You know, Destroyers, Forrester, Gautier. These are all players that Chuck Fletcher has drafted that are going to get their opportunity here very soon. We're going to see. And of course, there's this year's draft and the next year's draft and the picks that they're amassing right now. The Flyers gave up a lot 2 summers ago for Risto, getting rid of Gossphere, trades like that. They gave up a lot for Tony Delangelo last summer. But Chuck Fletcher, if you look at the of the drafts, if you look at the upcoming draft picks, has done okay in recomping some of that. All right? He made some mistakes. He's made a lot of mistakes. He's gone through a couple bad breaks too. So I'm not sitting here. I'm not giving Chuck Fletcher a pass because I'm just like you. I don't know, and I'm not fully confident that he can lead the rebuild. But to think that he's negligently or criminally sits at home thinking of new ways to disrupt the Flyers, it's just ridiculous to me. It's bad. Chuck Fletcher is a symptom of the problem of this team. The problem of this team goes long, far back before Chuck Fletcher. And yeah, Ed Schneider is to blame. He is. I hate to say it. I love you, Ed. But he is to blame too. Bobby Clark is to blame. Bill Barber and Paul Holmgren as well. And the list goes on and on and on. So it's been a tumultuous week for the Flyers. But as now we move past the trade deadline, we picked up 2 more draft picks. We got rid of Zach McEwen and Patrick Brown, which obviously doesn't really mean anything, but they were 2 expiring contracts that would have walked for nothing, and they got draft picks. That's fine. They didn't get rid of JVR because of that contract. Simple. Bottom line, the money. Nobody wanted it. And now it's time to move forward. And as the Flyers are battling their asses off, they went out and they won a hell of a game on Sunday against Detroit, and they're battling. I know they're losing, and I think they lost or whatever to Tampa tonight. It's the same. It does my heart good that we are this type of team now. But now it's a matter of amassing some talent. Now I need Chuck Fletcher to be Chuck Fletcher. Now I need a GM. Now I need him because I don't want to hear anything more about auditions and tryouts and whatnot. We know what we got here. We're going to come down with some money. We're going to lose at least $7 million of the cap this summer. There's some decent free agents floating around out there, on the older variety. Tarasenko will be a free agent. Patrick Kane will be a free agent. Jonathan Towles is going to be a free agent. I mean, there's some name. Ryan O'Reilly's going to be a free agent. I don't know if you necessarily go out and break the bank on these guys. I don't know what you do there. There's obviously the Connor Bednar thing and the draft, and Connor's not the only player. I ran an article a few weeks back on the EOP kind of listing off the top 30 some odd draft prospects in the National Hockey League this summer. Connor's not the only one. Now, he is top of the heap, but there are some decent players that are going to be there when the Flyers pick. I think right now, if things were to work out, I think they would pick around 8th. There's some players there's going to be a lot of players down there that can affect this team positively next season. Cutter Gauthier apparently is close, I hear, to potentially signing his pro deal and leaving Boston College after one season and coming to the Flyers. Yeah, Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson going to come back from injuries now. Again, the contracts are the contracts. Do I think Sean Couturier should have gotten an 8-year extension? No, right? No. But this is before the injury. Risto's contract is not a good one either. Travis Sanheim, who was being benched for the majority of the second period tonight, that's a horrible contract too. So as I mentioned, Chuck Fletcher shares some of this. He does. But there's got to be hope, man. That's all we have, right? And as I said before on this program too, this season needed to happen. All this stuff needs to happen. We got to burn it down to build it up. And that's what's happened. And yeah, it's embarrassing. We don't have, as Tortorella said, we have zero respect around the National Hockey League. But you know what? That needs to be a battle cry. That needs to be a chip that every Flyer and every Flyer fan carries on their shoulder until the day we return. So we can't give up the fight. So go Flyers, and let's continue to churn away. So there's my spiel on Chuck Fletcher. Again, I'm not pro Fletcher. I'm not necessarily anti Fletcher. I can see it from both sides, but his time is now. And if he does not produce starting this summer, yeah, then we're going to have to start talking, right? But I can see where I got the history. I know how we kind of twisted our way down this road, and it's not all his fault. Some of it is, but it's not all. Let's transition now because I went on about an hour rant on Chuck Fletcher and the Philadelphia Flyers. But let's transition now to the Phillies real quick. Grapefruit League is in full swing. Some of the headlines there catching people's eyes in Philadelphia and Clearwater. Of course, Andrew Painter, the 19-year-old phenom, mystery shoulder pain, or is it elbow pain? The Phillies are not telling us anything more about it. It was shut down a few days ago. No further information on Andrew Painter and his issues with the tightness in his shoulder. Obviously, that's not a good sign. Told you this weeks ago. We should have went out and signed it for cheap number 5. Was really concerned about a couple of things. Obviously, I don't want to see Andrew Painter get hurt. But again, now we're kind of like left with that internal option, which is now the internal option of the internal option. So, more to follow on Andrew Painter as he kind of hopefully fights his way out of this injury and is still a contender to make the opening day roster. But because of the injury status, and I guess the last news the Phillies had given was that he was shut down indefinitely, the odds of him making the roster out of spring training are pretty much slim to none because he's not going to pitch, but maybe one, who knows when. So he's not going to make the roster out of spring training. So he will start the season more than likely on the DL and then probably go from right there to AAA or AA. So the Andrew Painter experiment is going to be put on the back burner for at least a little bit, hopefully for a very little bit, as this is nothing major, does not require the dreaded Tommy John, and we can move forward and get him back in pinstripes at some point in the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season. I think that that would be something that everybody would look forward to seeing. But yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame the kind of turn that Andrew Painter has taken. But now it's kind of just hopefully he gets out of any kind of danger with injury and he's able to resume pitching as soon as possible. But other than that, the Phillies have been kind of churning along offensively. They're hitting well. It's really hard to gauge this team 1 week in. There's been some lopsided games. I watched a game the other night where Zach Wheeler, I think it was on Sunday. Zach Wheeler lasted an inning or two, and then he got shelled by Toronto or whatever. But it's nothing really to take from any of that. It's very early in the spring. It's all about now knocking rust off and kind of getting things. But Jake Cave, Jake Cave, man, um, making a name for himself right out of the chute here. Cave was the guy we picked up from Baltimore. He's probably earmarked to be the backup center fielder, a bench player, and a bench that we desperately need some help here. He's showing a lot of power. 2 homers, like 3 triples, 5, 6 RBIs. I mean, he's been showing a lot of power. That's another headline, another good news story coming out of camp as we're desperate for some power off that bench and some contact hitting off that bench as well. So Jake Cave doing what he's got to do to impress and hopefully make this team and be that viable backup center fielder and that power bat or that contact bat off the bench. So and then of course Trey Turner, who's doing well. The new rules are another headline as players are getting acclimated to the new rules and the pitch timer, the larger bases and whatnot. But so spring training is churning on and on as normal, but no hold the presses. We're going to stop, right? We're going to stop, folks, because we in a matter of 1 hour. That's right, because I've been on the air now for going on an hour, and I said this at the top of the show that in 2 hours we have the start of the 2023 World Baseball Classic. It'll start here in an hour out there. Where is it? It's out in the Pacific Rim somewhere, I believe. No, it's not. I think it's in Cuba or it's in Venezuela. It's Latin America somewhere. But Cuba will be facing the Netherlands tonight as they will kick off the 2023 World Baseball Classic. And the Philadelphia Phillies, your Fightins, man, have 16 representatives in the WBC. That's right, 16. 8 from the big league club and 8 minor leaguers have qualified to participate for their native countries. And let me tell you what, that could not be, that's awesome. That is awesome to hear about. We have an opportunity, even though it's not going to be them in friggin' spring training games, but and then obviously we're going to get into some of the ramifications of this thing, but it's nice to see that an organization that was so bereft of talent just a couple years ago is sending 8 minor leaguers to go to the WBC, and that's testament to the farm system, right? Obviously 8 regulars are making the team. Representative from the 8 of the 8 Phillies, 8 Philadelphia Phillies on the big league club. On Team USA, you got JT, Kyle Schwarber, Trey Turner. Now, Bryce Harper did make the team, but of course is not going to play due to his rehab of Tommy John. On the Dominican Republic, Gregory Soto will be pitching for them. Venezuela will boast Ranger Suarez and Jose Alvarado. Mexico has got Taiwan Walker. And Israel, Garrett Stubbs is on Team Israel. The minor leaguers, Ibrahim Armenta in Mexico, Malik Binns for Great Britain, Jaden Estina for the Netherlands, Brian Marconi, guess what team he made, right? Italy, and Noah Surral in Canada. Vito Frisca, what team you think he's on? Italy. Vamil Machan for Puerto Rico, Rickson Wingrove for Australia. Or round out your other 8 Phillies, the 8 minor leaguers who also qualified for the WBC. So here tonight, in about an hour, it's going to kick off meaningful baseball in March. We went from meaningful baseball in November, boom, right back into meaningful baseball in March. It cannot get any better than that. Now you might be wondering, when is the main event, right? When are we going to get to the real games of this tournament, right? When are we going to get past Panama and the Netherlands and Italy versus Cuba? When are we going to get past and get to the main event? When is Team USA going to lace it up? Well, they're not going to play until Saturday, and they will face off against Great Britain to kick off their tournament. Hopefully, that's not much of a struggle for them. I would not believe it would be. If that game can be seen on at 10 p.m. on Fox. Matter of fact, this entire tournament is being televised by the Fox family of networks: FS1, FS2, and Fox Sports as well, and Main Fox. So be on the lookout starting tonight. If you got something, got a couple hours to kill starting at 11 o'clock tonight, tune in for Cuba versus the Netherlands as they will kick off the 2023 WBC tournament. And as I mentioned, Dave chimes in. Dave, how you doing? Do I think the pitch clock will be a problem for Wheeler? Again, Dave, we've had this conversation before. It's not a pitch clock. It's a pitch timer. There are no clocks in baseball. It's a pitch timer. Dave, come on. And do I think it'll be a problem for Wheeler? I think it's going to be a problem for everybody. I think it's going to be a problem for everybody, at least for the first half of the season. You've seen events of it. You've seen it kind of rear in its ugly head. I think, what was it, Gene Segura, who of course now plays for the who does he play for? Miami Marlins. Was called out because he wasn't ready to bat in time, and he had 2 strikes on him, and he was penalized with the strike, which means he struck out. So I think it's going to be a problem for everybody: pitcher, batter, catcher, everybody, at least for the first half. Some pitchers more than likely, more than others, and yes, Zach Wheeler and his little meltdown the other day, you can attribute that to the pitch timer. I think you definitely saw him kind of hurrying up a little bit more than he's used to. And Zach Wheeler is a pitcher that likes to work in time. I get that, but he's gonna have to figure it out. They all got to figure it out. There's no other way to do this. But yes, I think he'll struggle, and I think a lot of others will too, and I think the batters and the catchers will too. I think it's going to be a very interesting product of baseball for the first 3 months of the season this year. So, to answer your question, Dave, yeah, I do think you will. So that brings my final point here as we get ready for the WBC, and it's going to be fun because, as I said, it's meaningful championship level baseball in March. How does this affect the players who are trying to get acclimated to the new rule changes? Because as we've mentioned on this program, you got the WBC that's not following through with the rule changes. There's no pitch timer, there's no larger bases, and the shift is still legal. To they started out trying to work on the fact that they're coming off of a pitch timer. They're working on bigger bases. They're working on dealing with not doing the shift. And they've been doing this for about 2 weeks. That 10 games maybe into the spring training. Now we're going to stop, and a large chunk of the Major League Baseball population is going to go now into a tournament where international fame is on the line, and there's none of these rules. I mean, how is that going to set them back a little bit? And then they're going to come back on like circa March 22nd ish. That's when the tournament ends. I know teams will return. Players will come back before that when their teams are eliminated. But on March 22nd or 21st is when the championship game is. And I fully expect Team USA to be involved. So that means at least 3 of our players will still be playing baseball in international play. But when they come back on March 22nd, how is that going to affect their development? How is that going to affect their timing as they're trying to kind of figure out this new baseball? So there's a lot more that meets the eye here when it comes to this. So, but let's not lose sight of the fact that tonight at 11 p.m. the WBC begins. Cuba versus the Netherlands. Be there, be square. 11 p.m. I think it's on Fox. Let me go double check that for you guys. It is on FS1 for those of you who want to go check it out. 11 o'clock tonight. Cuba and the Netherlands. It's barn burning baseball, baby. All right, folks. That's going to do it. That's going to do it for me. I've drone on and on and on for a while. It was mainly about the Flyers because I felt it needed to be set. It needed to be set straight of how I feel about Chuck Fletcher and what the job he has done or hasn't done about this team. So I am going to leave you for the evening, and I want to thank you. But before I do, God, man, I almost jumped off without paying the bills. Before I do, let's go look around EOP. Of course, we are in the beginning of a new week. Last night you had the Sully squad. Tonight was Kelly Greenhour. Me, a little bit later on, actually, probably already now, Chalk Talk, and then a little bit Clear the Ice with Mike Laro as we'll be talking Flyers and Bolts, and then the rest of the action here on EOP for the week. Make sure you're checking it out because there's something to offer for everybody, and so does So does Dolan's Bar, especially on St. Patrick's Day. Join them for their 69th annual St. Patrick's Day at Dolan's Bar on Friday, March 17th. They will be doing it the way they do it down there. Uh, Brent Push from 93 WMMR will be there live broadcasting on site from 3 to 7 p.m. Then hang around for the after party, or I should say the party. Live bands, food vendors, drink specials all night long. Make sure you're checking out Dolan's on St. Patrick's Day, the only place to be on St. Patty's Day. And Philly sports trips, what more can I say? Traveling like the pros. Look at that bus trip to the Bronx, April 3rd. That is definitely on my radar. I'm looking heavily into that. Going and attending the draft down in Kansas City. Going to enemy territory and rep the Eagles like we do. Do not back down. And then some of the Union Philly Denver Colorado trip, the dual weekend of both Union action and Phillies baseball out in Denver on May 13th to the 16th, and then the trip to London to check out the Union of the week of May 24th to May 30th. That and much, much more. Head over to phillysportstrips.com and travel like the pros. And if you're not going to go with them and you need some tickets on the fly, then there's no other person you need to call but Sherry's Ticket Town. Family owned and operated since 1946. www.sherrystickets.com for those great, hard to find sports, concert, and theater venues. Great fees, no hidden prices, and you save an additional 10% when you enter the promo code EOP10. That is Sherry's Tickets Town. Make sure you head over there. And our main man, Dave Cherry. What can I say about Dave? Workman's comp, motor vehicle accidents, personal injury, or criminal law. Dave Cherry's the man to call, 610-565-0300. Tell him Matty B, Talking Philly Sports with Matty B, and the Edge of Philly Sports sent you, and he will take the best care that he humanly possibly can for you. Folks, that's going to do me in tonight. I want to thank you for coming on, spending another great Tuesday night with me. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Philadelphia sports week. Until we talk again, what do they say? That is the news, and I'm out of here.